Okay. So he's like a Chinese Matt Ridgway stuck living as a Chinese Walton Walker. It's funny how things work out, isn't it? Hey, wait, what does that make his boss then? Malcarthur? Yeah. You like that one? Yeah, I thought you'd hang up. Okay, yeah, see ya. January 28th, 1951. You command mighty armies, so mighty that they have defeated your enemy time and again, an enemy that the whole world thought you could not possibly take on. And now, your glorious leader orders you to continue the fight until total victory. You know, however, that it is not possible, that your armies are now ever more outgunned, out-equipped, and outfought. You know the cost of continued attacks. You also, unfortunately, know the cost of disappointing your glorious leader. What are you to do? You are Peng Dehuai. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the Wolfhounds pushed north and made some good ground, successfully engaging a Chinese force near Suwon before withdrawing. Fighting in the east near Wonju continued to take its toll on the North Korean attackers. This week, U.S. 8th Army Commander Matt Ridgway's new operation begins, but before that, I want to start with this. Is China, as the U.S. insists, an aggressor nation in this war? There are arguments both for and against it. And Isidore Stone talks a great deal about this question in his book, The Hidden History of the Korean War. On January 12th, when the British Commonwealth parley urged direct talks with Stalin and Mao Zedong, a State Department spokesman said coldly, "We will not participate in these talks until the Chinese communists have stopped fighting." They had. On the Central Front, MacArthur's troops, as we have seen, were fighting North Koreans, not Chinese. And the day after the State Department spokesman rebuffed the idea of direct talks, an 8th Army communique disclosed that there had been nothing but patrol action for 8 days in the West. Stone suggests that a lot of what MacArthur has been saying the past few weeks might actually be more calculated than it seems. He accuses MacArthur of shooting at an enemy that wasn't here, and basically trying to hide the fact that there has been a lull in action on the Chinese side of the front. In fact, this week on the 23rd, the exact same day the U.S. Senate unanimously passes a motion branding China an aggressor, it's the UN troops who are conducting aggressive patrols and reporting no sign of Chinese troops. And the only time Western newspapers really allude to a break in the fighting is when they announce that Ridgway's new offensive has reignited it. There are also some question marks about whether Maoist Communist China would actually care about being called an aggressor by the US or the UN in the first place. They've shown little regard for what's come out of the UN so far, and part of that is because the UN, in this case, is an active participant in the war. Remember, this is not a fight between China and the USA. This is a police action under a UN banner. You could also ask, how can China be an aggressor when Chinese forces didn't really join the fight in earnest until their ally North Korea was on the verge of total capitulation? UN forces could have called time on the war after they reached the 38th parallel, or when they took Pyongyang, or when they reached the Chongshan River. They didn't. On the other hand, there's no doubt that North Korea remains the original aggressor in this war. So, does preventing North Korea's occupation or annexation classify China as an aggressor by extension? Okay, there's lots of room for interpretation here, and you will have to make up your own minds, but it is an interesting question. But regardless of what might have been, let's get back to the material side of things. What are the Chinese thinking right now? Well, that depends on which Chinese you talk to. The commander of the Chinese forces in Korea, Peng Dehuai, is facing a difficult situation. In fact, if former 8th Army Commander Walton Walker were still alive, he would maybe really empathize with Peng. He's under pressure from all sides to resume the advance and finish the job. North Korean leader Kim Il-sung believes they've got the UN forces on the ropes and advocates a rapid campaign to take all of South Korea. This is one of the reasons we've seen the North Korean army, the KPA, going on the offensive while Chinese units hang back. Soviet observers and ambassadors also urge Peng to attack. Peng notes somewhat bitterly that the Soviets have failed to provide the air cover that they have promised him, while still seeing fit to interfere with his command. But Peng is also under pressure from the one man he cannot ignore, Mao Zedong. And just as we saw UN Commander Douglas MacArthur trying to fight the war from Tokyo, now we see Mao trying to fight the war from Beijing. If originally Mao had seen the decision to enter this war as a way of serving notice on the rest of the world, especially a communist world so long under the hegemony of the Russians, that this was a new China, now he was slowly becoming a prisoner of his own pride and vanity. Mao is not only confident of his army's power and the inevitability of his victory, he also fears being seen as weak or timid by the Soviets or by the West. The excellent first stages of his Chinese campaign can only be solidified with more advances and more victories. And Mao too believes that total victory in Korea is very possible. This is the main reason why he's chosen to reject the UN ceasefire principles. But there is maybe something else here too. A few months ago, Mao's eldest and favorite son, Mao Anying, signed up with the Chinese PVA to serve in Korea. Peng was sure this was a bad idea. It was going to be dangerous. With the UN controlling the skies, there hadn't really been a safe place in all of Korea for the Chinese. Peng did his best to keep Mao Anying out of the fight, assigning him to the PVA headquarters a short way north of Taechon near the Chinese-Korean border. Despite this, on November 25th, in the midst of the chaos of the UN offensive and Chinese counterattack, Mao Anying was killed in a napalm strike by UN planes. There are actually a few different tales as to why the UN chose to hit that position, including a tale about egg-fried rice. Supposedly, Mao was cooking egg-fried rice during the daytime, which led to UN planes realizing the Chinese were in that area and bombing his position. There's no real evidence for this story beyond it being a popular rumor, but it is believed widely enough to be worth a mention. Now, I can't really say how much the news of his death is still affecting Mao Zedong's judgment when it comes to strategy and diplomacy, but I imagine it hasn't helped things. Either way, the situation on the ground for the Chinese is very different from how the people at the top see things. Peng's men are starving, and that is not an exaggeration. In fact, in this most recent offensive, food deliveries from China accounted for only a quarter of their needs. It's not that they don't have the food available, but getting it to the front lines has been a near impossible task. Incredibly, it's actually more dangerous right now to be a truck driver in the PVA than a frontline soldier. Peng is not ignorant of this, and identified supply as his biggest concern before the Chinese even set foot in Korea. Peng's constant mantra with his staff was the need for supplies. He had, at the start, commanded an army of some 300,000 men, and it grew even larger as he prepared for future battles. As he had predicted, the logistics were a nightmare. In December, he had at most 300 trucks to ferry supplies to his men, and those trucks had to travel in the dark with their lights off, making at best a total of 20 to 30 miles a night. Resupply of both ammunition and food became the great vulnerability of his army. Chinese troops even loot the corpses of their slain comrades for ammunition or food. As I've mentioned before, while pursuing 8th Army, they were mostly okay, being able to find stores of American rations left behind. But these have long since run out. Cropland has either been destroyed by artillery strikes or has been left unattended by local depopulation. So there's little hope of Korea's own agriculture resolving the issue anytime soon. And the current harsh winter also means that foraging yields very little, if anything, at all. Peng also knows that the Americans have plenty of strength left. Yeah, the battles at Kunuri and the Chosin Reservoir were brutal for the American troops, but far more men and equipment made it out than anyone on the Chinese side thought possible. Against the nationalist Chinese in the Civil War, or even the Japanese in World War II, operations like those likely would have completely annihilated their foe. But the Americans have been able to bring air power and artillery to bear in such huge quantities that they've largely managed to get their isolated units to safety, albeit with heavy losses. Now Peng is thinking, If all of that power is unleashed on his forces as part of a thorough and methodical offensive, what happens then? Can he even stay in the south, let alone go on the attack like Mao and Kim want him to? Well, planes are finally really getting into the air on the communist side, operating out of Andong on the Chinese-Korean border. They're mainly confined to the northern reaches of Korea, in a corridor which is becoming known to UN pilots as MiG Alley. This week, we start to see the first large-scale air battles between American F-84 Thunderjets and Soviet-made MiG-15s, piloted by Chinese and Soviet pilots. The Americans are getting the better of their adversaries in these battles, but are also taking casualties of their own. This is, of course, a bit too localized and too far north to really help Peng's forces just now, but maybe it's a sign of things to come. We shall see. Anyhow, Matt Ridgway's new operation, Operation Thunderbolt, gets going. The big news this week. Ridgway is very satisfied with the work of the Wolfhounds last week, and more aggressive recon is being done to try to nail down exactly what Chinese units are south of the Han River. Even with all those reports coming in, though, Ridgway wants to see it for himself before he commits his men to battle, fearing another trap. On the 24th, he takes to the skies in a reconnaissance flight piloted by Earl Partridge, commander of the U.S. 5th Air Force. Ridgway sees no significant concentrations of Chinese in front of 1st and 9th Corps, which bodes well for his operation. See, Thunderbolt is actually something between an offensive and a recon mission. Only a small percentage of his total force, one reinforced American division from each corps, plus tank support and a South Korean detachment, will be heading forward. He wants the advance to be slow, methodical, and cautious. His men are to spend their time combing every inch of ground for hostile troops. It's not a land grab kind of operation, and it's most important that they don't end up with large Chinese units behind them. Every plane the U.S. has is going to be thrown up into the skies, and 1st Corps will also be able to call on the ships of Task Force 95, operating in the waters around Incheon for offshore bombardment. Ridgway also tells 10th Corps Commander Ned Almond to step up patrols west of Wonju to prevent any units from slipping between Almond's troops and 9th Corps. Almond can actually spare force just now, since North Korean's 2nd Corps calls off its offensive and what troops they still have standing begin retreating back up to Pyeongchang. I say still have standing because the majority of them are standing no longer. Most divisions have suffered over 50% casualties. Many of the retreating troops disperse into the countryside and once again become guerrillas. Anywho, responsibility for coordinating Thunderbolt is given to 1st Corps Commander Frank Milburn, who will tell 9th Corps when to advance, although 9th Corps' attack plans themselves will be handled by their own staff. Milburn taps U.S. 25th Division, backed by the Turkish Brigade, to advance in his sector, while 9th Corps Commander John Coulter taps the U.S. 1st Cavalry Division. Coulter is being replaced, as I said last week, but until his replacement arrives, he stays in command. Beginning the 25th, the UN units advance in multiple columns along all roads available to them, spread out wide to comb the areas they're advancing into. Progress is slow, and there is sporadic heavy resistance. The Turks are hit hard east of Route 1, and the 8th Cavalry further east also comes under heavy attack before the Chinese break contact and retreat north. 1st Corps begins pulling ahead of 9th Corps slightly, which Milburn is happy to let continue, and around 1 p.m. the 26th, his men capture Suwon, where the battle involving the Wolfhounds happened. The heaviest resistance seems to be right in the center, where the lines of both corps meet near Yangju-ri. By the 27th, Recon has been able to identify all elements of the PVA 50th Army, who they're currently fighting. According to Recon, and backed up by the testimony of prisoners, the 50th Army is a screening force, while the KPA 1st Corps and the 5 Chinese armies that make up the PVA 13th Army Group are distributed along the Han River. Because of this news, Milburn has to slow 1st Corps down and let 9th Corps catch up, so progress from here until the end of the week is slow. Expecting to face heavier resistance as his forces advance, Ridgway gives permission for U.S. 3rd Division to join the advance. And today, the 28th, the forces of 1st Corps are about halfway between their jumping-off point and the southern bank of the Han River. 9th Corps orders 24th Division forward. They'll get moving on the right flank tomorrow. And that is the week. Ridgway's forces have made small but tangible advances, and done so with care and caution. Ned Almond in the east has managed to stem the bleeding and send the KPA 2nd Corps packing, and the Chinese seem unwilling to commit to a head-on brawl with the Americans. But they'll have to fight sooner or later. Peng Dehuai can hardly sit back and allow the Americans to advance with impunity. Peng himself, in terms of personality, is far closer to the men under his command than he is to those breathing down his neck. Here's a little analysis of his character from David Halberstam's The Coldest Winter. In a way, Peng was an almost perfect counterpart to Ridgway. They could not have been more similar in what drove them and the way they saw and handled their own men. It would not be hard to imagine some switch in ancestry, and an American version of Peng commanding the UN forces, and Ridgway, in a Chinese incarnation, the Chinese. Like Ridgway, Peng was a soldier's soldier, unusually popular with his men because he was sensitive to their needs. The more successful he became, the truer he remained to what he had been. He was straightforward and no less blunt than Ridgway. It amused him when some of his former colleagues in what had been in the beginning a peasant army began to take on airs once they defeated the nationalists. Peng still preferred to bathe in cold water, even when hot water was available, because he had always done so, and because this was what peasants did. In his lifestyle, he preferred almost monastic simplicity and was uneasy with unwanted creature comforts. He preferred curing illnesses with herbs rather than modern medicines prescribed by doctors, and he always ate very slowly. Deliberately so, he said, because he liked to think of the days when they had first started out always hungry. Now that he had enough food, he intended to savor it. Okay, so I guess that what makes a good soldier and what makes a general beloved by his men is the same in China as it is in the US. Despite the enormous differences in the structure of their armies, the values of their societies, and the way they fight, these two personalities at the head of their respective armies are about to clash for the future of the Korean Peninsula. And that reality is accentuated by the fact that in another life, another time, the two may have been very good friends. Two men with radically different starts in life, on completely different journeys, arriving at the same point in their lives and coming face to face in the name of duty. Their duel will continue next week though, and remember this: both men are very much playing to win. Exciting times, and to ensure that we are able to continue to bring you this coverage week after week, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. That is what does it. These are the newest commissioned officers, and Rick Lash is this channel's Army Member of the Week. If you want to see a real blast from the past, check out this Between Two Wars episode we did about Mao Zedong and the Long March. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.